I am Elise Epp. I am the country coordinator for Fashion Revolution Canada, and I would like to welcome you all to this exciting event and thank you so much for coming. First, I would like to acknowledge that I am in Winnipeg, which is the territory of Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. Our panelists are joining us from Vancouver, which is on unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, Yellowknife, which is Yellowknife's Dene territory, and Toronto, which is on the territory of the Anishinaabe, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, Haudenosaunee, and Huron-Wendat peoples. I would also like to say a huge thank you to Encircled, Free Label, and Earth and L. Their sponsorship is enabling us to pay our speakers for sharing their time, knowledge, and stories with us. We appreciate their support and also their acknowledgement that it is so important to listen to and value Indigenous peoples and their stories. A little note of housekeeping. We will try to leave a little bit of time for questions at the end. So as the discussion is happening, if you have a question, just write that in the chat and we will hopefully be able to pick a couple out for the end. And now for the most exciting part, introducing you to our panelists. Our moderator tonight is Himikalas. She has been showcasing her one-of-a-kind pieces since 1988 through her brands Touch of Culture and Copperknot Jewelry. She designed regalia for Squamish representatives to wear at the opening ceremony of the 2010 Winter Olympics in Vancouver, and she is on a lifelong journey to provide First Nations people a stage to showcase their culture, mentor Indigenous youth, and work with her Squamish community. And panelist Riley Kucheran is an Indigenous fashion researcher who supports a global community of Indigenous makers who are leading design resurgence. His experience in fashion retail, entrepreneurship, and Indigenous theory means he sees fashion as a powerful tool for decolonization. He is a member of the Biigtigong Nishnaabeg Pic River First Nation and an assistant professor of design leadership in fashion at the Creative School at X University. Milan Nakeko is a Dene Delasunline artist based out of Yellowknife, Northwest Territories. She's had a distinguished career as an artist, community leader, filmmaker, and actor. She is recognized for her exemplary work in reviving and teaching moosehide tanning techniques. This work has initiated a resurgence of the practice, shaping a broader community building movement within Canada. She is a founding member of Dene Naho. And finally, Warren Stephen Scott, a 33-year-old from Toronto, Canada, is a contemporary designer, tailor, and craftsperson, and a member of the Inklakapma Nation. He launched his namesake label in 2018 with his first collection as a part of the inaugural Indigenous Fashion Week Toronto. The brand was created to sustain and celebrate Scots Indigenous culture and to create a community united by contemporary design. And without further ado, I will hand this over to the panelists.
Thank you. I'd like to welcome everyone who's viewing our discussion today. My name is Himikalas Kukusialogwa Gwandisima. I am of Squamish and Musqueam ancestry from the Northwest Coast. It gives me great pleasure to meet the young people who are entering the North American market or the market. I just like to welcome Warren and Mila and Riley. I've, as a designer since 1980s, it's always nice to see new young minds coming together and so many people sharing their teachings and wisdom with your people, your communities, as well as the public, the general public. So I'd like to ask everyone on the panel to introduce themselves, and because I thought about that, because a lot of times it's hard for individuals to say the names of our tribes or nations, because if I ask somebody to say, Musqueam, it's just too hard, and Squamish, So I'd like to start off with Warren, give a little bit of background about yourself, and then we'll go around, and then we'll start asking some questions and sharing our experiences.
Sure. So my name is Warren Stephen Scott, and I'm a member of the Himikalas Nation. I'm a member of Biigtigong First Nation with Chehalis ancestry and British ancestry. I grew up on Vancouver Island, and I moved out to Toronto. I think it's going on 10 years ago now. So I'm still based here, and I've been kind of living in this design business practice since 2018. So I've gone from having a studio in my living room shared with two roommates, not really having a living room, having a studio, to a shared studio. And then just this past September, I'm now in a 1,000 square foot space, which is like a 4-minute walk from my house. So it's just been really great to be able to continue creating and sharing for everyone.
Oh, beautiful. Mila, am I pronouncing it correctly? Mila?
Yeah, Mila.
Okay. Mila.
My name is Mila Nakeko. I'm Dene Suthlene. I'm from Pic River First Nations. I am currently working at a Yellowknife. I am an artist, a filmmaker, and I'm a moose and caribou hide tanner. I like to say that I'm a land-based Indigenous arts educator. I travel to a lot of different First Nations communities teaching, and that's who I am.
Oh, beautiful. Riley?
Ani Bojo. My name is Riley Kucheran. I come from Biigtigong Nishnaabeg, which is actually where I am right now. I'm not in Toronto. Biigtigong is on the north shore of Lake Superior, so Great Lakes region. But I've been based in Toronto for about 10 years. I've been a student for a very, very, very long time. Since I graduated high school, I've been in school. And it was in 2015 as a graduate student when I started researching Indigenous fashion and realized there's this huge history of Indigenous fashion amongst all of our peoples. And I became really interested in what contemporary designers are doing, what past generations of designers did, much like yourself, Pam. It's such an honor to meet and share this space together because there is such a robust history of Indigenous fashion that just wasn't taught to people and people aren't aware. But thankfully, there's this movement happening right now, and there's so many things bubbling up with fashion weeks and organizations and designers and mainstream attention, which is really interesting. So at X University, I work at the fashion school and I teach intro to business because I feel I'm not a designer myself, but I've been interested in the business of Indigenous fashion. So I teach entrepreneurship classes and design history classes, and I've been thinking through and working with designers like Warren and knowledge holders like Mila to try and connect dots and move forward this incredible Indigenous fashion industry.
Yeah, it's a lot of change since I jumped into the arena. I moved back to Canada. I've lived in San Diego, Los Angeles, Indianapolis, Indiana, Seattle. I've been fortunate enough as a First Nations woman to be a role model and be able to travel to places like Italy and Russia, and I mean, to the Indigenous communities and work with Indigenous people around the country, and it's pretty exciting. And then the next question I'm going to ask is your experiences and how you got into it. Mine was really, I was never wanting to be a designer. People say, did you used to sew, your doll's clothes or whatever? I was always involved in sports. But when I moved to Indianapolis, I was able to coordinate a lot of fashion shows with a friend of mine. And then I came back to Canada. I worked as a youth drug and alcohol counselor, and I decided to pair the fashion shows with our youth to instill self-esteem and confidence within our youth. And that was always been my main goal. And then one day we were traveling with designers to like Denver, Colorado, Seattle, showcasing a lot of our designers at that time. And then sometimes they would drop out. So my sister and I can remember this, we're sitting in Denny's just outside of Chicago. And I says, what do you think? Should I just start designing? And I said, I like clothes, you like clothes. And next thing you know, I started designing. So that's how I got into it. My mother used to sew all the time and knit and crochet. And the main part of it is my traditional teachings from when I was 5 years old in the potlatch. So I saw the beauty of my elders' work and the meaningful stories behind everything. So that's basically how I've combined both my tradition, culture, and the arts, as well as fashion. So whoever wants to lead off, that would be great.
Sure, I can lead off with that. So I was actually in a totally different field of studying before going to fashion school in Toronto. I was in general sciences in Victoria at Camosun College, and I wasn't really like too sure of like where that was going to end up. I kind of had this like loose idea that I was horticultural based, or like I didn't know. And then I kind of just wasn't performing well once I got into the second year, and as well as having sponsorship from my band to be able to attend post-secondary education. I just like couldn't continue doing that. And I've just have always had an interest in clothing and garments, in fashion shows, contemporary fashion shows. And I kind of didn't really understand what that world was for like a long time. I would like see these fashion shows on television. I didn't know like how you could be a part of it. So I left Camosun. I took a year off. I learned how to sew from a bridal designer who does alterations and a bit of custom work, Lily Kennedy in Victoria, BC. And I put together a portfolio for X University. And then I got accepted in, I guess it was 2012. And then that kind of has like informed my training more as like garment construction and sewing and pattern drafting. And so for a long time, I've been interested in how to construct a garment as well, and wanting to execute a garment myself that is saleable. And so that was like a lot of my practice and studying at first. And then I graduated in 2016 and took place in the inaugural Indigenous Fashion Week in 2018. And then that's kind of where everything else began.
Great.
Yeah.
And everybody, other traditional, I know Milaz works with a lot of traditional hides, and which is always has interested in me and interested myself. And then Riley is taking a different approach. So I'd love to hear your stories.
You know, I've always loved fashion. It's really funny how hide tanning has turned into this resurgence and a part of the material that we're seeing a lot of being reincorporated into a lot of jewelry and accessories. I'm really loving seeing all of the things being made with it. I've always loved fashion. I actually, when I was younger, I wanted to be a supermodel.
Yay!
And so I started modeling when I was 15. So I was doing a lot of fashion shows and photo shoots when I was really young. And as I got older, I worked with a designer who had returned home to our home community, Darcy Moses. And on my summers, I would go and work with him. So he taught me how to draft patterns and sewing things. I made a lot of leather pants. There's a lot of men in the north that wanted leather pants. And then I ended up going to art school. So I'm very creative person. I paint and do all kinds of other things. I'm currently working on a couple of film projects as a director. So my creative story is really just an ongoing adventure. And I went to school in the United States and I moved back in 2008. And I had learned how to sew from my grandmother. So I was making moccasins and purses, and she had passed away while I was in college, and I needed more hides. So I thought I would just tan my own hides to make the things I needed. And I just didn't know that it would turn into a huge journey for myself. So that was like 14 years ago.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, like working with our communities and like all of the things that come with high tanning or any of the types of any of our land-based practices in our communities. We all have different ways that we connect with the land as individuals or in our communities during special times of the year. And it's really just instills a lot of confidence in somebody, and it's really brings the community together. It's really like a wonderful work. I really love this part of my life, and being a part of seeing it grow and spread across all of our nations, and new high tanners coming up, and artists incorporating it into the work, and not just incorporating the hide itself, but incorporating the process into writing. I'm reading poetry, I'm hearing stories of how it's being incorporated into storytelling in all different ways, how this type of work is inspiring people to create using like just one of our oldest art practices. I like to say that hides, leather and caribou for my people is a very foundational art form, because it's built, we build upon it and we embellish it, or else we make homes or sleds or our shoes. So it's really a foundational art form to build from.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you.
And so like Mila, I always loved fashion as well. I read fashion magazines monthly religiously, and I also dipped my toes into modeling a bit. And my first job was at Abercrombie and Fitch. And there's a new documentary about it on Netflix, which I think everyone should watch. It was a horrible place to be and work, but that was my introduction to fashion, was Abercrombie and Fitch. And I worked in corporate retail for a long time, kind of climbed the ladder a bit, and went to Club Monaco and then Ralph Lauren. But I eventually got really dissatisfied with the industry. I started seeing the dark sides of the industry. I was working behind the scenes in stock rooms and seeing like the destruction of merchandise is just mind-boggling when you think about the waste and the environment. And this was also like during grad school as I was finishing up my BA maybe, and starting to realize that, oh, I don't want to work in fashion, in the industry, and I don't want to contribute to that horrible machine that is churning and destroying the planet. There could be careers in critiquing the system, or maybe being a fashion educator. And so I went down that different path and stayed in school. And this was also around the time that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission came out. And I was hired to develop some curriculum in the School of Fashion, very introductory 101 Indigenous fashion curriculum. And I had to start with the TRC and with the horrible things that happened in residential schools, right? Like our clothing was taken away, our culture was taken away. And the fashion industry today exists because of the survivors who passed down those skills. Like, you know, amazingly, we're so blessed to have those elders who pass on stories and skills. And so I kind of created that lecture, and the lecture just grew, and I did it again and again, and realized that I wanted to write about this and research this. And that's how I got started. And I think what I'm trying to do now, or what I have been doing, is taking that experience in the industry and thinking about how our communities can support each other with, business models or whatever, but are more in tune with our values. So how can we collaborate? How can we work together? How can we connect people like Mila with Warren, with people like you, Pamela, and like working on the industry in that way? And also kind of thinking through what needs to be taught in fashion schools as well for Indigenous peoples, but also just non-Indigenous peoples. Like, what should we know and be teaching each other? And I do just, I want to mention, during all that educational journey, I also traveled to Mila's territory and spent some time at Dechinta, which is a land-based university, and saw high tanning and was just like amazed, right? Like, I didn't grow up in my culture. I wasn't taught my language. And so it has been like a healing journey for myself as well, coming to know what Indigenous fashion is. And that's where I am today.
Nice, very interesting. I love hearing your stories. Darcy Moses is a good buddy of mine. When he was in Vancouver, he started designing clothing, and I showcased him at the Hyatt Regency, and his work was just absolutely ahead of its time. So I just, one of my nieces just went to mentor under him up north somewhere. I can't remember where she went, but I told her to tell him hi, and he's still staying in the business as well, which is great. The next question is, why is the clothing so important to you? I think what I'm hearing as well, even myself, everything I design has a meaning. And I think that's one of the main differences for us, for the First Nations that are involved in the clothing. Like, when I went to school in Los Angeles, I received my degree at Otis, one of the great schools in the US, which I kind of fell into. Thankfully, I had a counselor at Squamish Nation who I went to CEPU to take textile arts, because as designers, you cannot find the colors you want for that season, or so I said, I'm going to go take the 2-year course at CEPU, and was able to learn how to dye my own fabrics, manipulate fabrics, which was really absolutely awesome. And then I went into my band office, tribal office, some people would say, and the counselor said to me, he goes, I noticed you like fashion. You've been sticking with it for a while. Would you be interested in getting your degree in it? And I said, yeah, that'd be pretty cool. I'm a single mom. I had 2 kids. I said, let me think about it. He goes, you either go to New York, Parsons, or Los Angeles at Otis, which, because there wasn't a degreed fashion design program when I was going to school. So I said, let me think about it. I drove down the street and I picked up my phone in my car. At that time, it was connected to your car. And I said, you know what? I'll do it. That's all I said. I'll do it. And I'll go to Los Angeles because it's closer to my home. And so that was best training I ever had. It's not only training in fashion design, it's pretty much how to run a business and how to meet deadlines, right? So it was very interesting. And when I talk about, why the clothing is important, the first pieces I did is I came home and I said, I want to make burlap beautiful, because when my dad was growing up, his granny would make pants out of potato sacks for him, like all the boys, because they couldn't afford fabric. So I thought about it and I went, you know what, I'm going to do organza and burlap, and I'm going to add the Coast Salish paddles, that kind of. So I did these pieces, and it came from pretty much my heart. It wasn't just like, oh, I'm going to look at some magazines and just, do something from there. So that's my question now is, why the clothing you design or your pieces or the work you do, why is it so important culturally and personally and creatively? Everything I like to do is, right now I'm kicking myself in the butt because I need to be getting ready for Santa Fe. Last year I did 3.5 months, created a whole line, hustling around, getting this embroidered, sewing this, how it is. It's just chaos. And then you sit there and wonder why you do it. But then when you see it on stage and it's representing our people, that's where it comes from for me, because my last collection was called the Leadership Collection, which was the killer whales, who are the leaders and, you know, the chiefs. So that's where my designs come from my heart and my traditions and my culture. So if you can share a little bit about your stories, that would be great.
Sure. I guess I'll start again. So I've done how many collections have I done? 2 major collections. My first one for Indigenous Fashion Week in 2018, and then I hadn't released any clothing until 2022. So it was kind of building up to this whole kind of capability to go into clothing production. And with this last collection of clothing, my great-great-great-grandmother was a cedar basket weaver. So all of my grandmother had 11 kids. So in all of my aunties and uncles' homes, everyone has like a few cedar baskets that were passed down, and they've always been a part of everyone's house. And sometimes I've always found inspiration quite like difficult to process, or like when it's going to come, or what it's going to be, or how it's going to translate into something different or new. I like it to be kind of a reference rather than like a recreation of something. And so with this last collection, it was titled Cedar and Seki Sky. So the core kind of influence was these cedar baskets. And so I'm wearing one of the garments that was the runaway show. But this is actually 100% polyester, and I'm familiar with this fabric Radsmere, and that it kind of can hold body and its structure and shape versus like a natural fiber, which would maybe not kind of replicate in the same way. And I played around with gathering and ruching, and so this is gathered with an elastic bobbin underneath. And then I wanted to replicate the rows and rows of the cedar baskets. And I hadn't really up to that point experimented with fabric manipulation. I was really focused on how do I sew a garment that is saleable myself, because it's like, I don't know, I can't go out and contact a factory and get manufactured size runs. And so that was the really first time I experimented with fabric manipulation. And I think because I had like arrived at that skill set of constructing a garment, that I was now able to experiment in that world. And then a lot of my work involves very vibrant colors, and that's how I dress personally as well. And so that's kind of my own contribution to like my collections always, is like this array of like very luxe and colorful garments. And in 2020 this was the last vacation I had actually. I spent some time in Palm Springs, California, and that the indigenous name for Palm Springs is Seki, which means boiling water. Palm Springs is in the Coachella Valley. It's a desert. And I was constructing this first collection as well at the time. And I kind of liked the idea of creating this like reference of cedar weaving, but if this is in violet or in electric blue, then it's not like the color of like cedar and of wood. And so I kind of took that influence of like the vacation and the trip and being in California, and saw like the colors of that space translate into the cedar of like my people. And I had a custom color building on that, I had a custom color of acrylic made for the first time for my earring production. I don't have a swatch here, do I? That is from a sunset photo in Palm Springs.
Nice.
Of the clouds, so that it kind of tied in with like the whole collection as well. So yeah, I'm really happy with like that kind of, I don't know, it just seemed like really natural rather than like a formula of like trying to, it's very hard to like build a collection and produce.
Yeah.
And so I think, yeah, I'm hoping I'll be able to continue around the same kind of path as that.
Thank you. Hoichuk. Mila? The question was, how does your clothing culturally, personally, creatively, when you're designing, where is it coming from? You know, as you shared a little bit about it earlier.
I haven't designed anything in a long time. I used to make moccasins and purses. I used to make little clutches out of hide, and I love to bead. I was taught how to bead by my grandmother. And when I started working with moose hides and teaching, that all kind of wasn't what I was supposed to do, I guess. And so I'm supposed to was into the whole tanning hide. So, and when I finish a hide, I do make things personally for my family, but I also give a lot of my hides away to elders that are unable to tan hides anymore. And so I'm not really designing anything myself, but I feel like I am a part of inspiring people to like make things with their moose hides, or making hides for people to make things with. For myself, I have a lot of hunters in my family. My dad and my brothers and my uncles go out, and so I tried to make them mittens and moccasins and stuff, so they have clothes, warm clothes to wear while they're out in the bush. And I'm actually really interested in cording and making rope. So I cut a lot of my caribou hide up into strips and I cord with them. I think it's really incredible, like designs and just the braiding patterns of some of the work that just checking things out in different archives. Hopefully having a research trip to the UK in the fall to look at some other things in the archives and recreating some of our older like patterns. And yeah, but cording, there's flat cording and like round cording, and I'm really interested in making those types of things. I'm also do snowshoes.
Oh.
And in snowshoes, you use caribou hide that's raw and you make it like into thin rope. And then that's also a different weaving pattern for that too. I would like to get better at doing those types of patterns and being able to incorporate those into other pieces. But mostly art objects that I'm interested in making and continuing to teach hide tanning.
Wow, it's a gift. Thank you for sharing.
So I have a lot of thoughts going, and I think what's so important about Indigenous fashion is the method and the process of making is so different. And sometimes people talk about Indigenous fashion as sustainable fashion, because when you work with hides, for example, you need to have a really, really great relationship with those animals, right? You need to be in tune with their environment. You're so respectful for those animals. But Indigenous fashion is sometimes on like a whole other level because of the relational aspect. Like what I hear is so much community, right? Our fashion isn't really separate from a way of life, I think. Like, so it's natural to share what you hunt, right, with your elders, and it's natural to teach others and to revive those crafts. And I think that's what's really important is it's like the making is the gift. That's what people talk about. Like Leanne Simpson tells us that the gift is in the making, and it communicates our stories and it communicates our values. And when I think of something like a beading circle, everyone's beading, but what's really happening is you're in a circle together and you're talking and you're sharing and you're, you know, building a relationship. So I think one of the important things about Indigenous fashion is, I guess you can call it micro, but it's very relational sometimes. You're making something for an auntie, or you're giving a hide to someone, or I'm calling Warren up because I want something made. Like that can happen in Indigenous fashion because there's those personal relations, and that's, I think, the key difference between like a Western mainstream fashion that, you know, mass produces as much as you can. I think Indigenous fashion is more intimate, because it incorporates our values, and yeah, it's not like this separate industry. It's a part of us, really.
Yeah, that's something as a designer. I mean, some people have, you know, have said I've been around a long time, which I have been. I oops, my Amazon is going off. So anyway, I should have unplugged it. In regards to designing, and one of the I read one of the messages was about how we can use fashion as decolonization. That was mentioned in one of Riley's articles. Many times I've thought about, and I have done it, is to be able to relate some of the issues, problems, residential school. How do we get recognition or the word out and educate the public about really what's going on through fashion? You know, there's a time where I did this skirt and I painted on it. It said council, Bill C-31. I just painted all of these like outstanding issues at the time. That was probably about 15 years ago. And then I had the girl take her skirt off, and underneath it said community, tradition, culture. So the message is that how we get back to that balance was to look at our communities, look at our elders, which thankfully I've been fortunate to grow up in the Potlatch way. And thankfully I was able to listen to the stories of my dad's side and my mom. My dad is in North Van, the Squamish. He's been gone many years, and my mom recently. So now it's up to us, well, me as an elder now, is to be able to carry it on with my family and be able to share what was shared with me. And yet on the other side, you're doing your fashion. I really thought about that question. I love draping. I love, you know, getting natural fibers. I get excited when I go to Los Angeles or New York and look for fabrics. And then I sit there and think, how can I make it all come together as a collection? So I get very excited about it. And the other thing is I don't cross the line. I won't do different tribes work. You know, I've been raised with, you know, here's your crests on your mom's side, here's this and that. On my dad's side, it's paddles and beading and velvet and baskets, because my grannies wove a lot of baskets on the Salish side. So I think we're going to be running out of time. I'm not sure, but it's 5:41 now. So I think maybe we can talk a little bit about that decolonization. How can we use fashion to get messages out? And then maybe the last part would be next steps. What are our next steps, or something maybe we could commit to? Mine is always mentoring youth and teaching our young people how to be more confident.
Yeah, so I am running a commercial business, and I have now, with my new studio, I have a much higher rent that I have to pay every month, and that was like a big step for me. But I also have participated in 2 Indigenous Fashion Week Torontos now, Indigenous Arts Festival. And there is one up and coming, and I was trying to think, am I gonna apply to do this again? Can I? It's like so much work, and it does take me months and months of time even to show like something very small and petite compared to Western collections. And so I didn't apply this last time, and I'm just like I've been having like a very busy time, and last year was like a very big growth year. And so I decided not to apply, and I just like went with that. And I knew, and I'm starting to plan for this year. But then just recently at the beginning of the month, my Auntie Tara, who's our band manager and has been for many years, she FaceTimes me. And there's a rafting resort on our territory and that they lease out. And so in June this year, they're having the resort for the community for a weekend. And so my aunt is kind of planning this community event. And so it kind of focuses around harm reduction, addiction, and just like some workshops. And then she FaceTimed me and she's like, I would also like to put on a fashion show. And I was like, oh my God. So, but then it kind of all just like made a lot of sense that even though it would have been part of Indigenous Fashion Week, which has like launched me and like even started my whole career, it felt like really purposeful that I had more time, and that it's not going to be lights and like camera, and that I'm gonna design some pieces for my cousins and then my cousin's girlfriend, and then and I kind of just like really like the idea that something that is much more lighthearted, clothing, dressing up, but it's also part of something very heavy and serious as well. And I think that's something that our communities do really well at the same time. So I think that connection is like always very important. Like I'm so happy I have like this Indigenous community virtually, and makers that we're always supporting, but then also going back and being with my own community as well. I think it's kind of exciting to kind of balance in between this like contemporary fashion and then going out for this workshop.
Hila?
I love that. How exciting. It's really being it's like sharing all of your gifts and talent with your community, different phases of your career. It's really amazing. I want to go.
It's on the Himikalas River in June.
Nice.
And more people are welcome as well.
So fashion, decolonization and fashion. I thought about this quite a bit actually a while ago, like in 2011 and 2012, earlier on, just about how good it feels to wear our culture and to wearing, and how we identify too, like you could tell what tribe somebody's from their moccasins. And when we just like are like the rock your mocks thing, that was like that social media thing is so nice to see. Also, there was a time where there was not a lot of high tanners, and I actually had a friend at one point was just like, I never wanted to wear my moccasins because I wasn't too sure if I would be able to get another pair. And then he was like, now I don't have to worry about that because everybody tans hides now.
Oh, nice.
And just how beautiful there was a switch from trying to learn how to tan hides and looking for somebody, like traveling to different communities to learn different stages of the process. And then coming to a point where you see hide tanning racks outside people's houses, and people everybody's just like, who has hides, and on social media, and people are like, call so-and-so. And so there's like this, being a part of this resurgence and this moosehide revolution has been really beautiful. And it really just, there's a rippling effect to seeing that, and to seeing how it affects our communities, and how our hunters are more conscious when they're out on the land, and purposely bringing hides back, and like there's less knife marks, and then so they're also taking more care when they're harvesting an animal, and how they have plans for their hides, and they also just like I can take a hide and start it, and then I can pass it on to somebody else who can just finish it off. And I have and seeing hide camps pop up in other parts of Canada, and people texting or messaging me, asking me different questions for things. It's just really like, that's one thing that like we don't have to worry about. It's just like,
Yes.
like this process is going to continue. These teachings are going to continue on into the future. And so there was one point in time not so long ago where people were worried about that. And it's really beautiful to see that that this is something that's going to continue being done in our communities. And even with that aspect of the tanning of the hides, is like, we're on the land, we're using our traditional territories, we're asserting our inherent rights to the land, and to being there, and using the materials, the rotten wood, getting poles, hunting moose. We're also like observing the environment, to like the effects of climate change on the animals. And so there's just like, it just ripples out of the positive and important effects and that come with tanning hides. And just like also like our traditional Indigenous economic relationship that we have with each other in community, like how important that is. Like I have hide that I can trade with somebody, or I have the knowledge to tan hides that I'm a useful person in my community. And it's just like the whole I can talk about hide tanning for days. It's just and it was a really important part of my decolonization process when I started doing it. Even just the simple part of like learning, like when I first went to my auntie's place in Sun McKay, I had a notebook and I was taking notes down. And then I was just like, oh, slow down. And I'm just like writing notes furiously. And then finally I just like put the notebook away, and I just started like just embodying the process and everything that I was doing, how I held the knife, how warm the water was, how hard to pull it. All of that is just like in your physical memory and how you do that. And that part was like, I just like decolonized my way of thinking from like being at school and like memorizing stuff and taking notes and like all of that repetitive Western way of thinking, and then switching to being a Dene person and learning in a Dene way was like a huge shift at the very beginning of the work that I was learning how to tan hide. So yeah, it's all just like a big, beautiful moosehide circle.
Yeah, it's
Of
very
Indigenous-
beautiful, the process. And I like what you said about the Western way of thinking. And we've always been hands-on, and that's the way we've been taught all for generations. Yeah. Okay, Riley, I think we have about 8 minutes and then questions, or 5 minutes, or
Right. So I'll try and tackle decolonization in under 4 minutes. Decolonization is so complex. It's very personal. So we heard that with Mila, right? It's like a personal journey of unlearning the ways that you've always been, and realizing the ways in which you're colonized, right? Perhaps your whole life perspective, your career, it's investigated, it's invested in colonialism. So it's very personal, but it's also very systemic, right? It created these systems, legal systems, economic systems, political systems that are very colonial and damaging and genocidal for Indigenous people. I always separate decolonization as a two-part process. And so the first is the Indigenous-led process. And it's important that Indigenous people are leading this. It's that resurgence. It's that rebuilding, the remembering how to do things, the retelling of stories, the things that Mila is doing and passing on to new generations. And then I also think there's like this, if that's rebuilding, there's this dismantling that needs to happen of those colonial systems. So the fashion industry, which is very, very colonial and rooted in supremacy and exploitation, that needs to be dismantled. And so that part of decolonization is kind of like harm reduction, right? We're trying to reduce the harm that fashion is doing. So when you ask, what can I do? I think you can support Indigenous people who are doing the good work themselves in their own communities. Or you could just try and save the planet, right? You can try and mitigate the effects of climate change, because Indigenous peoples won't have land to go back to if the planet dies. You mentioned, the power of Indigenous fashion for decolonization, and absolutely, it's such an educational tool. Like Orange Shirt Day wasn't a thing 2 years ago, right? Like it's been bubbling up in our communities, but I think this was the first year where it became mainstream. Everyone was wearing orange shirt across the nation. Like education is the first part, right? You have to know how you've been colonized. So in that way, fashion can cause those conversations, and so many streetwear designers will have like messages on t-shirts, and that is really, really important as a first step in educating, mainstream society. But we do have to make sure that we're doing that good work in our own communities as well. So yeah, that's my thoughts. There you go. That was 2 minutes.
Wow. Okay, there's a question. Let's see here. From Elise, question 1. Just one, how do you feel when people who are not part of a tribe wear Indigenous inspired clothing designed by Indigenous designers? I've personally had that question often, because I've designed a ready-to-wear line. And I feel that if you're taking the time to support a designer or entrepreneur, whether it's buying their smoked salmon or whatever they start in a business, and you feel proud wearing it as a non-First Nations, I'm happy you've purchased it, because you're recognizing the first peoples of the country. That's my personal feeling.
I think it's so important to follow the money. Like who's profiting from this? Because the Indigenous inspired often means like a corporation. No Indigenous people are going to benefit. Like you have to do a bit of research and find, are you supporting an individual? Are you supporting an authentic Indigenous community? Because there's been so much like taking of Indigenous aesthetics and like whole fabrics and whole brands have built a legacy on the look, the aesthetic, and so you need to support Indigenous people, because that's having that ripple effect, right? If you're supporting people like Warren or Mila, you're supporting whole communities. So you do have to do a bit of research, but absolutely, like, be proud to wear it. Like, there's a reason why designers are putting this out there. They want you to purchase it and wear it proudly.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's the only question that has come up so far. I guess my closing words are, it's great meeting young people who are carrying on the traditions and doing, their part whether it's commercial or whether it's an art or whether it's tradition and teachings, we are still getting the word out. That's what I've always focused on, is making sure that people understand we are still here. We're productive. There was one time I was working with some Chinese friends of mine, and they immediately said to me, "Geez, you're different as a First Nations person. You're entrepreneurial. You're this and that." And I'm like, a lot of us are, but they don't see it. So I've been accused of being a serial entrepreneur because through COVID, I started a restaurant with my son. In my back, we designed this whole really enchanted cultural village in my backyard. So we opened a restaurant. I've got Airbnbs. I've got, things going on all the time. And this year I made a huge wheel, and I divided up all just like a medicine wheel, divided up where I'm focusing on different areas so that I'm not overdoing it. Before I would do 4, 5, 6 fashion shows a year. What are you gaining from it? You just do 2. If you do 2, you got more time to focus. So as a serial entrepreneur, I say continue doing what you're doing. And then maybe, I know there's been groups who've attempted to bring designers together to work together. It's not really worked in the past, because a lot of times I'll go and there's young people talking about things we talked about 30 years ago. So I think when you're taking your own steps and you feel good about what you're doing, and whether it's even going back to your community and sharing with the young people there, this job is not easy. And my last words are that I've always gone by the words, if you do things easy in life, life will be hard. If you do things hard in life, life will be easy. So I've taken that road for the past 30 years. And now it's time I keep talking about, I'm going to do a world cruise and go visit all these different places. So that could happen in the next 3 years for me. But you guys are young, keep working on your messages and come from your heart and continue doing what you love. Let me see. Then you can pass it. Oh, she said then we can pass it off to her. So Elise, I don't know how there you are.
Hi. Yes, no, I don't have a lot to say other than thank you so much to Himikalas, Warren, Mila, Riley. I had a smile on my face pretty much the whole time, I think. So I have really appreciated this, and I'm sure the audience has as well. Have a wonderful night, everyone. Thanks.
Hey,
Bye.
You too. And I'll see you guys, rest of you guys, young lady and young men in the future. And thank you, Elise.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
Okay, have a good night.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.